All right, today we're going to tackle a really big story. It's about how a single defamation lawsuit in India, filed by a major corporation, allegedly kicked off a massive wave of digital censorship. We're going to unpack the source material that claims this is where corporate power, government action, and free speech all crashed into each other online.
So the whole thing really kicks off with a critical question. It all starts with what seems like a standard legal move, just a single court order. But what happens when that one order
Is used to just wipe out hundreds of videos and articles practically overnight? Yeah, that's the central claim we're going to get into, how a limited court ruling could have possibly snowballed into such a huge digital takedown.
So, let's dive right into the allegations. The source we're looking at doesn't pull any punches here. It frames these events as nothing less than a censorship blitz, arguing this went way, way beyond any normal legal process.
And this is where the source really draws a line in the sand. The argument is that this wasn't just a case of platforms doing their usual content moderation. No, this was something else entirely, something far more deliberate and, well, far more severe.
So here's the core claim, right? The allegation is that India's Ministry of Information and Broadcasting took a pretty limited court order from a defamation case, a case filed by Adani Enterprises, and then used it to order the removal of a ton of content that wasn't even part of the original lawsuit to begin with.
Okay, so how on earth does a single courtroom decision blow up into this massive content removals so fast? Well, the source lays out a very specific, and I mean very rapid chain of events. And this is the part that's just wild, the sheer speed of it all. According to the source, you have a district court issuing an injunction on September 6th. Just a few days later, the ministry is already sending out these broad takedown notices, and then, bam, in less than 36 hours, platforms start pulling down content. It just paints a picture of a lightning-fast journey from a specific legal ruling to a widespread digital purge. And just look at the kind of stuff that allegedly got taken down. We're not talking about one type of video here. The source lists some of the most prominent journalists and popular commentators out there, but also comedians and investigative news outlets. It didn't stop there. Even things like subscription appeals and interviews that use totally legitimate news footage were apparently caught in this net. So you might be thinking, isn't this just normal content moderation? Well, according to the source, no, not even close. It argues that several huge lines were crossed in this process. The source really breaks it down into four key arguments. First off, by going after creators who weren't even named in the original lawsuit, it claims due process was basically shredded. Second, by taking down satire and commentary, it says criticism was effectively criminalized. Third, it alleges the ministry stopped acting like a neutral regulator and became more of an enforcer for a private corporation. And finally, all this pressure on the platforms, that was the tool used to achieve mass censorship at incredible speed. And the end result of all of this, according to the source, is what's known as a chilling effect. It's this idea that when people see prominent journalists and commentators getting silenced, they themselves become scared to speak out. And that kind of fear can just shut down criticism and dissent across the board. All right, so this is where we zoom out from this one specific incident to a much, much bigger question. The source argues that this whole episode isn't just about a few videos being taken down. It's a symptom of something that it claims puts the very principles of India's democracy at risk. The source frames the stakes with this super stark comparison. On one hand, you've got the core tenets of a democracy, right? Protecting dissent, guaranteeing free speech, holding power accountable. But on the other hand, it describes actions that do the exact opposite. They chill dissent, they censor critics, and they shield the powerful from scrutiny. The article's core argument is that these takedowns fall squarely in that second column.
So you might be sitting there thinking, okay, I get it. This is a big deal for journalists and YouTubers, but why should I care? Well, the source has a really compelling answer for that. Because, and this is the key takeaway, the article argues this isn't just about the right to speak. It's about every single person's right to hear. The idea is that when investigative reporting and critical commentary disappear, everyone loses out on the information we all need to form our own opinions, to have real debates, and, to hold our leaders accountable. Okay, so after laying out this whole problem, what's the fix? What's the path forward? Well, the source doesn't just leave us hanging. It ends with a really clear call to action that it believes is essential to protect free expression.
So it lays out these 4 steps. First, it calls for complete transparency on all these takedown orders. Second, it says Parliament needs to hold the ministry accountable for its actions. Third, it's a call for all of us to actively support and share the work of independent media. And fourth, it urges a defense of the courts to prevent them from being used to issue these kinds of sweeping gag orders. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most powerful thought the source leaves us with. It frames this entire issue not as some simple defamation case, but as a fundamental fight over constitutional rights and what democracy really looks like in our digital age.